Hi, I'm State Senator Jason Allen. Today we have Scott Berg with us from Delta Waterfowl, which is a great organization promoting duck hunting in the state of Michigan. Scott, welcome. It's nice to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the movement on duck hunting and waterfowl prevention and protection, and what you're doing in your organization.
Well, I started out duck hunting when I was 12 years old, and that was back in 1978. And I remember the skies were literally full of ducks during duck season. Started duck hunting in the Upper Peninsula with my dad. And
so now from the Upper Peninsula, you were whereabouts?
If you would go just below Berg County.
Oh, Berg County. Okay.
Right.
That's kind of where I go to deer camp.
Very close to your deer camp,
okay.
Right? Yep. And you know, the ducks were very abundant back then. We'd have bluebills, divers, canvasbacks, redheads just coming into the decoys all day, and it went from that to where now we're lucky to see a few ducks, and we get excited when we see a few ducks. So certainly the duck numbers aren't as many as there were back in the 70s, but this year, fortunately, we had a very wet nesting season, which provided for premier habitat for ducks.
Okay. And so, like in the state of Michigan, I know that we hear a lot about sort of turkey hunting. We hear a lot about deer hunting, some things that go on with bear hunting, and sometimes that we don't talk as much about duck hunting. And so, what are the species that are here in the state of Michigan, and which ones nest, and then how many are migratory through the flyways and those types of things?
Being we're surrounded by Great Lakes, we've got a pretty unique opportunity to see birds that cover just about the entire gamut of the species for waterfowl. We have our puddle ducks, which typically include mallards, pintails, black ducks, all the way to the diver species, which would include the bluebill or lesser greater scaup, canvasbacks, redheads, and all the way to the sea ducks, which would include the long-tailed duck, the surf scoter, white-winged scoter, and black scoter. So fortunately, a lot of these birds do nest in the Great Lakes region, but we also do get migrations from the prairie pothole region, which typically is north-south Dakota, up into Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, that area. And those
you were talking about these puddle ducks and then the flyways. Now, there's like a western flyway.
Right. There's the Pacific Flyway, the Central Flyway, the Mississippi Flyway, and the Atlantic Flyway. And we are right in the heart of the Mississippi Flyway here. And so a lot of the birds that we see that hatch locally will stay here year-round, especially in the mid to the lower part of the lower peninsula. Now, the birds that we have in the Upper Peninsula will typically migrate from the northern parts of Canada, come from the Hudson Bay region, and they'll also come from the prairie pothole region and kind of come to that southeast flight direction during the season.
Now, is that what you kind of classify as like this puddle duck, or is that a different, the pothole?
Right, yeah, the puddle ducks will nest in tall grass areas where there's these small ponds where the freshwater invertebrates hatch. The hen mallard will have to eat those freshwater invertebrates to create enough protein to lay her eggs. And these are seasonal wetlands, so what may look like a beautiful pothole in the springtime may be dried up by late summer, early fall, which is good because that's what we need for those freshwater invertebrates to develop.
Okay. So now the pressure on ducks, you talked about in the 70s that there were a lot more. Is that because of sort of predators? Is that pollution? Is it man's growth? What are some of the reasons why there may be fewer ducks in the state?
Certainly, predator management is a big issue that we're facing right now. The number of predators like the skunk, the fox, the raccoon, even the mink are expanding quite rapidly. Unfortunately, because of economic factors and social factors, trapping is not as popular as it once was. So now that trapping, the folks aren't trapping as much, the fur prices are down, those predator numbers can increase. And therefore, there's a direct result that our research through Delta Waterfowl has found that these predators are eating the eggs and some of the ducks that are on the nest, which is decreasing. Also, we're seeing an incredible amount of habitat loss across the continent, North America into Canada, the whole continent, and that's having a very significant impact on our waterfowl production as well.
Now, is that, do you think, because of just the growth in rural parts of Canada and the United States, or is it a change in climate, or what are the reasons why the habitat has been degraded?
Typically, when you see loss of habitat is because the farmers are trying to get into areas where it wasn't really good farming before, and they're draining the wetlands. Currently in the United States, we have some protections that prevent that. In Canada, the wetland loss is rampant right now. They're draining potholes faster than we could fill them up, and that's not healthy for our waterfowl population.
And that goes back to, I know we've had some areas over in the Thumb where they put conservation easements in.
Yes.
And allowed for sort of along certain areas. I know we had talked with some of the people, like I'm on the Hunting and Fishing Committee chaired by Democratic Chairman Jim Barsha, and they had talked about sort of how they're trying to increase habitat.
Yes.
And so that's some of the things that we're doing here in the lower 48 that they may not be doing as much in Canada.
Absolutely right. In fact, with CRP, we're still struggling with CRP here in the stateside. There is nothing in Canada to help like that. So Delta Waterfowl has created the Alternative Land Use Services Program, which pretty much emulates what the U.S. is doing with CRP, and it would have a nationwide effect on Canada. If we lose CRP in the United States, there's currently no other program that will replace that.
Okay.
So we may be very dependent in the not too distant future on a program such as ALICE to work in Canada to help keep our duck production up.
So talk about that. Delta is doing sort of international activities. Tell me a little bit about sort of what the Canadian plan you're working on is.
Well, the Canadian plan is designed to work with farmers, where the farmers would set aside some of their properties that aren't exactly the best for agriculture. Right now they're trying to make the best living they can for their families, which is very understandable. So what Delta Waterfowl is working with the Canadian federal government and provincial governments is to allow for this property to be like a set-aside where the farmers are reimbursed a certain percentage of money to keep that into natural wetlands or keep the tall prairie grasses, which is so critical for duck production. And we have some sample or test projects going on. We do have one in Ontario, which would be very close to us, and that will significantly affect our Michigan ducks, especially on the eastern end of the Upper Peninsula and the northern part of the Lower Peninsula.
Very good. Now, you talked a little bit about sort of habitat development. So you've got in Michigan, we've got a very diverse geographic area. From where you grew up and where I go to deer camp, you've got almost rocky parts of the western Upper Peninsula. You get into sort of the Seney, the National Wildlife Refuge, and the big Two Heart River coming all the way down through to northern Michigan, where you've got some heights between Grayling and Gaylord. A typical landowner, what are some things that they can do, especially if they have some swampland or wetlands, what are types of things that they can do to help with habitat for ducks and protection of waterfowl species?
Well, we have a program called the Hen House Program.
Okay.
It was designed by Delta Waterfowl research students several years ago, and what it is it's a nesting tube for mallards. We utilize mesh wire. We roll it up by about a 3-foot length, about a 30-inch diameter, so that the hen mallards can go inside. We wrap grass into it, and there's this very specific plan with directions on how to do that. We are seeing about 10 to 15% nest success on the bare ground, where a hen mallard would have to lay her eggs if there wasn't artificial nesting structures. The reason we have that low nest success is because of predation.
Okay.
The skunks or raccoons are getting in there. With the hen house in place, we're seeing about 80 to 90% usage rates with about 80 to 90% nest success, which is huge, and that's a very, very high number.
So they
for
get
us.
your small ducklings hatched, and which increases their survivability.
Yes, and then once they hatch, they jump directly from the hen house into the water where they can seek shelter and graze with their parents on the food.
And that's something that a typical family can do, is that?
Yes, they cost about $10 to make if you were to buy the materials. The nice thing is we've got several Delta Waterfowl chapters across the state of Michigan where we're looking for places to put our hen houses. So all we would ask is that we would have permission to access that a couple of times a year to actually go in and see if they were productive or not, and then to restuff them with grass the following year, because they do get weathered pretty heavily.
So talk to me a little bit about the organization that you work with, which is, I assume, like so many of the other conservation organizations, you do banquets, you do research, you do help to promote the species.
Right.
What's Delta like, and what do you do?